Hello, thanks for being here. We're going to spend the next 13 minutes talking to you about team building training and the necessary tools you need to engage your audience. Team building does not just happen. Incidents like a crisis, such as the Oso landslide in Washington State, can throw unlikely groups of people together to help one another. But for the development of long-term teams who have clear objectives to achieve a goal, it takes some thought and knowledge to build an effective and enduring team. The knowledge we will share today will hopefully ground you when you develop others to build other teams. So let's get started. What makes a great team? Let's start with the iconic Steve Jobs, the former co-founder, CEO, and chairman of Apple. He built teams to create some amazing and innovative products. But how did he create such successful teams? He knew how to build a team. He brought intensity, passion, and a clear vision of what he wanted the team to accomplish. He never lost focus, and he had trust in his people. His leaders and employees could not help but be folded into that energy, and they took his vision to empower their own teams and bring those ideas to life. He led with his heart, his physical being, and his brain. And he had the power to persuade others with his clear vision to improve performance. He made the work relevant to his teams. With his team-building skills, he brought Apple back from near bankruptcy and made it into a household name. That's the kind of team we want to create. So today we're going to share with you some solid tools for you to take with you when you hold a training about team building. We're going to focus on the importance of team building, effective behavioral and cognitive learning, and the elaboration likelihood model theory and its impact on team building initiatives. Your trainers today will be Tamara Hauser, Abby Johnston, Russ Langbin, and Melissa Laramie. So what does team building mean to you? Let's throw out some words on what team building means. Respect, mission, goals, trust, relationships, results, empowerment, commitment, collaboration, innovation, accountability. What words come to your mind? Let's take a moment to watch this TED Talk by Tom Rujek. Tom talks about the simple task of a group of people building a freestanding structure made of spaghetti, tape, string, and a marshmallow. But it's not that simple, because it forces people to collaborate very quickly and using all sets of learning, the ABCs we are about to share, to be successful with the seemingly simple task. He also speaks of the components of the elaboration likelihood model, that to persuade and change people's behaviors when they weren't successful with this task. So let's watch. This video is about 6 minutes. So now that we have spent some time considering, discussing, and understanding why team building is a vital component to certain training sessions, let's move on and look at some specific types of learning that will further help us develop team building initiatives in our training sessions. In Silverman's book, Active Training, he reveals 3 different types of learning: affective, behavioral, and cognitive. Appropriately, he calls these the ABCs of learning. For truly effective training sessions, it is imperative to operate within each of these 3 learning types in mind. However, before we can link these learning types to our content, we need to understand them. So let's now take a look at these ABCs one at a time, and we're going to give you examples of their applications. Effective learning. Effective learning includes the fostering of attitudes, feelings, and preferences. So another way to think about effective learning is to see it as the learning type that is about connecting with the heart or the emotional parts of your participants. Behavioral learning. This includes the development of competence in the actual performance of procedures, operations, methods, and techniques. So just like with effective learning, there's another way to consider behavioral learning. It is helpful to see it as directing your content to engage with the body and actions of your participants. Cognitive learning. This includes the acquisition of information and concepts related to the course content. So again, another way of viewing the cognitive learning type is as making sure you direct your content at the brain or mind of your participants. So ultimately, the ABCs of learning type is really about making sure we connect with our participants' heart, body, and brain during our sessions. This will ensure that our training session is relevant to all participants. So now let's move on and let's give some examples of what utilizing the ABCs of learning in a team building training session might look like. Effective learning, or heart-focused learning, is again about engaging the emotions of your participants. Here's an example of an activity that will build teams and utilize effective learning to do so. This is called our stories or introduction activity. What this entails is that each person will share their favorite children's story and explain why it meant so much to them. They must then decide one word that best describes both of them and the story they choose. This activity links positive emotions from childhood to the current identities of those in the group and helps teammates connect with each other on a more emotional level. This again goes back to the heart. Behavioral learning, or body-focused learning, is again about engaging the physical body and behaviors of your participants. Here is an example of an exercise that accomplishes this objective in the area of team building. It's called the minefield activity. So objects are scattered in an indoor or outdoor place. In pairs, one person verbally guides his or her partner, a blindfolded person, through the minefield. This activity connects team members through physical movement, proximity, and trust. Cognitive learning, or brain-focused learning, is again about engaging the mind of your participants. Here is an activity that accomplishes this in our focus area of team building. So with the brainstorm activity, split your group up into several small groups. Each group is assigned on one of the ABCs and must create a unique team building activity and facilitate it with the entire group. Through getting the groups to use their minds to engage in the material and create new activities, this brainstorming activity dynamically requires the participants to engage their minds while at the same time build teams with the need to collaborate. Alright, let's switch gears now from the ABCs and talk about the elaboration likelihood model theory. So what happens if you meet resistance, or do you need to persuade members to team together? This is where an understanding of the elaboration likelihood model can help you with your training techniques. Training is the process of persuading others to change or alter their attitudes and behaviors to improve their performance. The elaboration likelihood model that was developed in the 1980s by Richard Petty and John Cacioppo has been the leading theory of persuasion and attitude change. The elaboration likelihood model, or for short ELM, proposes that every message we receive undergoes cognitive process in two different ways, either central or peripheral. Elaboration likelihood is determined by an individual's motivation and ability to elaborate. Motivation in this sense is defined as the individual's personal relevance to the persuasive message. Ability is defined as the individual's cognitive competence or prior expertise with the attitude object. So, all individuals will differ in their ability and motivation. In addition to the active training elements that must be considered when conducting a team-building training, the ELM proposes that to be effective, the motivation and cognitive ability of participants must also be considered by the trainer. Participants must be motivated to process the messages you are presenting carefully. People are more motivated to think critically about messages with high personal relevance. This aligns well with Silverman's teachings, as he argued that it was the personal connection to make a training relevant for the audience. Assessment, storytelling, and active participation are all techniques that personally connect with an audience. Let's read this quote. "The critical question, therefore, is not what topics to cover, but what you want participants to value, understand, or do with those topics." Let that sink in for a moment. Value, understand, or do with those topics. Which persuasive method you choose to use also depends on the ability of participants to process the concepts being presented. Knowing your audience is crucial when designing an active training program, because if the content you deliver is above the heads of the participants, there's going to be a little chance for capturing the audience's attention, let alone change their behavior. The central root of cognitive process involves message elaboration, which a person carefully thinks about issue-relevant arguments contained in persuasive communication. So this approach should be used when the audience is capable of thinking critically about the message or content, has high motivation to learn, and are in an environment where they can focus on quality of arguments presented. And of course, do your homework. As trainers, it is critical to be knowledgeable about the content you are training and have credible sources for the content presented. If a trainer is successful in presenting content in this way, then long-lasting attitude change is possible. So due to the sheer number of messages, we all must continue on a continuous basis, that not every message can be processed through the central route. When we process messages quickly using the peripheral route, we focus on cues to help us decide whether to favor the argument being presented or not. When there is low motivation on behalf of the participant to learn, they will focus on peripheral factors, which usually results in only temporary attitude changes. Let's take a look at this graphic here. Now, elements from both routes can be combined to produce the most appealing arguments for presenting the course content. But if the goal of training is long-term behavior change, then training content must be highly relevant for learners in order to motivate them. And learners must have the cognitive ability of prior knowledge and skills to make thoughtful decisions. Let's pause here. What's your key takeaway with this knowledge? And did this knowledge help guide you? And how will it's going to help you in the future? So let's do a recap of the knowledge you have gained. You understand the importance of team building, how effective teams can make or break an effort, even when marshmallows are involved. You have the ability to create Steve Jobs type of teams. The ABCs of learning, and how all three can connect our senses to effectively learn. And the elaboration likelihood model theory, which offers a thought processing technique to persuade and personally connect with others. It's going to be the cognitive ability, the motivation, peripheral factors, the content, and the personal relevance that's going to instill behavioral change. I'd like to close with this visual. I know we mentioned earlier in this presentation that teams get built rapidly when a crisis hits. And as we talked about with Steve Jobs and the success he has experienced in his organization with team building. So sometimes, though, the best teamwork does happen when the worst happens, or when it's grassroots. When people forget about their egos, personal goals, or even themselves, and fall naturally into the collective thought of best intentions. Take a look at this photo taken at this year's Boston Marathon. Feel the energy, the togetherness of everyone coming together to making sure this year's marathon was peaceful and triumphant. The Boston Marathon is a powerful example of people coming together as a team to unite and do great things. Team building does not just happen in sports or organizations, it can happen anywhere. And that's a great thing as well. Thank you.